I'm going to show you why this is called a king cake. It's Mardi Gras season in New Orleans, and every grocery store you go to is going to have a ton of king cakes displayed at the front. It's our favorite treat this time of year, but it can be hard to come across a good one. The good bakeries usually boast a few hours of waiting outside in line to get a cake. My favorite king cake comes from Randazzo's, so I wanted to emulate their style with that brioche bread covered in that thick, velvety icing. And I really think I struck gold. Let me show you how. Like I said, this is going to be a brioche style dough, so we're going to start by making a Tongzong Paste. This is a Japanese baking technique that's going to help keep our bread softer for longer. Over medium, we're going to heat our 120 mils or half cup of water with our 180 mils or 3/4 cups of whole milk. To that, we're going to add our 60 grams or half cup of bread flour and whisk constantly until it kind of globs together and forms this pasty texture. You can pull it off heat when it starts to pull away from the sides like this. Set aside, and while that cools, we're going to proof some yeast. Into 120 mils or a half cup of whole milk that we've heated to between 90 to 100 degrees Fahrenheit, we're going to dump in 1 packet or 7 grams of active dry yeast. Also, I stole a spoonful of the 100 grams or half cup of sugar I already measured just to help activate the yeast. Give it a quick stir and let it proof for a few minutes while we get our dough started. I would highly recommend using a stand mixer for this just because of the volume of dough that we're working with. It's not absolutely necessary, you can do this by hand, but it's just going to require a lot of kneading, and I mean a lot. We're going to add 560 grams or 4.5 cups of bread flour, as well as the rest of the 100 grams of sugar and 10 grams or 1.5 teaspoons of kosher salt. With the dough hook attached, give it a quick mix before dumping in your
frothy boy,
as well as the Tongzong Paste, and just start mixing on about a medium speed to get things incorporated. After about a minute, we can start adding our 2 eggs plus 2 egg yolks, 1 yolk at a time. I also forgot to grate in a few seconds worth of nutmeg. This should be done with the dry ingredients, but it's optional if you don't have it. Finally, with the mixer running on medium-low, we're going to add in 113 grams or a whole stick of very softened butter, about 1 tablespoon at a time, to let each piece get incorporated. Now is where we adjust the flour content. You can see that mine's still not really pulling away from the sides, so I add in about 30 grams or a 1/4 cup of flour at a time to see if it makes enough difference. For reference, I added about 80 grams or 2/3 of a cup of flour in addition to what I started with. Do note that I live in New Orleans and it's very humid here, so usually I have to add more flour than most recipes call for, so that's why you have to go by feel based on your own environment. It's done when it starts to pull away from the sides, and when you touch it, it still feels sticky, but it doesn't stick completely to your hands. We're going to rest that in a greased bowl for 1 to 2 hours until it doubles in size. I keep my house pretty cold in the wintertime, so mine took the full 2 hours. In the meantime, we can make our filling. The filling is simple. We're going to combine 200 grams or 1 cup of light brown sugar with 8 grams or 1 tablespoon of cinnamon, as well as a pinch of salt, and whisk together until well combined. We're also going to need 56 grams or 4 tablespoons of softened butter, as well as 30 mils or 2 tablespoons of heavy cream, so might as well set them aside now. Once your dough has risen, we're going to generously flour our surface and begin to form it into a rectangle. Make sure you flour both sides well and keep a good bit of flour underneath it so it doesn't stick to your countertop. I'm trying to size mine roughly to my cutting board, which is about 20 by 15 inches, but what's most important is that you roll it fairly thin and you get it to an even thickness throughout. Now we're going to measure and cut these lengthwise into 3 even strips. Here's a tip: you can score them before you cut them to make sure it's even. This way we can fill them and roll them individually so that we can braid them later. Which, speaking of filling, we're going to grab our butter and cream that we set aside and we're going to coat our strips. First with the softened butter, which it's really important that it's really soft. I'd say on the brink of melting, otherwise it's not going to spread. And then we're going to fill in the gaps by brushing in our heavy cream. This is going to allow our filling to stick, as well as keep each of our layers soft and moist. Finally, we're going to sprinkle over our cinnamon sugar filling as evenly as possible and try to leave a little bit of a margin around the edges so that they can stick once they're rolled. I had a little extra filling, which is fine. I'm just going through and lightly brushing off any excess that's left on the layers. That way they'll roll up nice and thin. To roll, just take your time and go as tightly as you can, and then keep the seam on the bottom once you get there. I'm also going to carefully stretch my rolls just a bit so that they don't bulk up too much. I'm basically going as long as the thinnest roll will let me and matching the other 2 to it. The braiding is not as hard as you think as long as you take your time. There's pros that can do it in seconds, but there's no need for us to. You're just basically bringing the middle to the outside to the right, and then the new middle outside to the left, making sure to keep it as tight as possible at the bottom, and then repeating the process. Then we just need to form a ring to make the cake, which is very simple. Just take your time and be careful. I kind of just lightly press the 2 ends together and roll them just a bit so it stays in place. You might be able to make it look prettier than I do. Then just transfer to a greased, parchment-lined baking sheet. Just be careful and do it in steps so you don't break it. Then we just need to cover with plastic wrap or a damp towel to rise one more time for 30 minutes to an hour. Meanwhile, you can preheat your oven to 350F or 180C. Once risen, we're just going to brush over our egg wash, which is 1 whole beaten egg with a splash of whole milk. Remember, this is brioche, so we want it to be nice and browned on top. That will bake in, I'd say, 30 to 40 minutes. Once the top is nicely browned, you know you're done. If you want to be really sure, then you can stick a thermometer into the middle, and about 180 degrees Fahrenheit is a good temperature. One more step, we're going to brush over like 2 more tablespoons of heavy cream. This is going to help soften up that crust and give us that heavenly texture we're looking for. After about 5 minutes, you can transfer it to a wire rack to cool completely. Now we're going to make our icing. We're almost there. You're going to take 320 grams or 2.5 cups of powdered sugar and sift them into a bowl. You're going to add in 56 grams or 4 tablespoons of melted butter. The secret ingredient here is lemon juice. You're going to put in 4 grams or 1 teaspoon. This is very necessary for the amount of sweetness that we have. Finally, a few squirts of vanilla extract and maybe 20 grams or a tablespoon of corn syrup. Give it a preliminary whisk, and this is where you have to pay attention. Put in splash by splash of whole milk and continuously whisk until you have the desired consistency. I don't want a donut glaze on my king cake, so I'm not going to make it thin. I'm trying to make this thick and pasty so I can spread it rather than pour it. You do you, but in my opinion, this consistency here is superior. I'm just using a rubber spatula to spread across the cake until I run out of icing. You don't have to use all of it if you don't want to, but I love my sweets. For sprinkles, I'm not a fan of those sugar crystals that you see on some king cakes, so I found these Mardi Gras sprinkles on Amazon. I'll link them below. You can find something else you like or do whatever you want here. We just need to give the icing about 20 minutes to set, and then we can slice up and enjoy. This has been on my bucket list for quite some time. I've been wanting to make one of these for a long time. I'm extremely pleased, at least aesthetically, at how this came out. I'm really interested to try it. If you live around New Orleans, you know the selection at local grocery stores is so vast, and there's so many things to choose from, so many different fillings and flavors of king cakes. But there are so many bad ones out there. I'm not lying to you. Like so many dry, crunchy exterior king cakes with, no moisture in the middle, and it's not chewy like it should be. And I really couldn't find a recipe for something like a Randazzo's king cake, which is what I was trying to base this off of, so I'm gonna see if it lives up to the hype. You thought I was gonna forget the vanilla milk, didn't you? Oh, and where I'm from, we don't use these for king cake. Let's go. Okay, I will say it right now, this is better than Randazzo's king cake, and I dare anybody to take this and put it side by side and tell me otherwise. The inside is so fluffy, chewy, just like a cinnamon roll that you would be used to, but the way we cooked it and the way we prepped the dough with the Tangzhong, the outside has that just a bit of crunch of the brioche, but it's not dry. I'm always honest here, and I really didn't think on the first try that I would get something that would be successful, but as you saw through the process, there are adjustments that you make, with the flour while you're mixing the dough, and then with the amount of milk that you're putting into the glaze and things like that, so it doesn't have to be set in stone. You can call audibles and change parts of the recipe on the fly. The more that you work in the kitchen and the more you do stuff like this, the more experience you have, and you know what kind of results you want, and you know certain ways that you can get there. Anyone who knows me knows I have a hard time taking compliments and a hard time promoting myself, but I really think this is one of the best things I've ever made. I can't think of any part of the ratios that I would change. That little bit of lemon juice in the glaze is noticeable. Like I said, it brightens up all the sweetness that you have throughout this cake. The dough is just sticky enough, but not too sticky, but also not too dry, so that it comes out with this perfect amount of moisture. I guess I would have changed the baking vessel because it kind of got stuck on the rims of the baking sheet and started baking up, and I would have probably preferred it to go out just a bit more. So I would use something bigger than a regular sized baking sheet if you have it. Standing in line for a good king cake around Mardi Gras season here is definitely a hassle. There's people lined up outside of the doors, and you wait for hours, and they might run out of inventory before you even get there. And those things are expensive. Go on the websites and look up how much you pay for just like a large size king cake. This is worth the hours of work. It's really not that hard. It is kind of time consuming, but do it just once a year at the beginning of the year as a treat for your family to kick off Mardi Gras season. Just look how soft and fluffy that is. Do this and I promise you'll be happy you did. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.